Growing up in New Jersey, a special trip for us as a family was to Highland Park, where we could do two things that I find interesting to reflect on in light of the service that we're having today. First of all, we could actually get bagels, because bagels weren't readily available then when I was growing up. Hard to imagine. Highland Park was the center of the Jewish community in that area. And we could also get Ichiban noodles, the actual Japanese version of the things that are not the same thing as top ramen, let me just say. So the Japanese and the Jews were kind of relegated into this little corner community in New Jersey where we could also buy silver dollar plants, which are what are featured on the cover of your order of service today. And later, my family would grow them because we always have them in our homes. And you could let them dry, and then you could rub the little husks between your finger and your thumb, and they would come gently off, revealing the beautiful, luminous plants which you could use for decoration. It's interesting to me to think about Highland Park, this sort of non-WASP ghetto in my young world, where all other cultural expressions were allowed. Now, bombarded as we are by so many different cultures today and their expectations, it can be hard to imagine that there was such a time or such a place. But still, even today, we know that there are places where this is less true. And it delighted me this summer when I was traveling by train into Grand Rapids, Michigan, as I got off the train and was about to take the bus, to see pro-immigrant signs pasted across the storefronts across the street. It was the same joy I feel when I discovered sushi in Salt Lake City last summer and kimchi in Chicago a few years ago. Yet, for many people, we know this new cacophony of culture is not exhilarating or exciting. It is threatening and concerning. And this discomfort is seen in fueling the rising tide of white nationalism among us. This is the drive behind much of the false news, and also, I think, more insidiously, an ethic of false scarcity, which will pit neighbor against neighbor in endless conflict unless we turn back the tide to an understanding of true abundance. False scarcity says only one truth can exist, and it is seen in a social order which places the needs of white, straight, cisgender culture centered around a very narrow interpretation of Christianity, which does not stress the teachings of Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. It says that any deviations from this one truth are changes to be feared and opposed with venom and with violence. We are in an era in which we are being preached the gospel of false scarcity. We are being taught, let me be clear, the false gospel of much scarcity. Gospel means actually the good news. So why would this be good news? Well, it would be good news to you if you are tired and worn out with change and feeling a little uncomfortable, because it apparently gives you permission to stop learning and trying new things and simply to focus on what you want and what you think you need. The false gospel, shall we call it, of false scarcity. Now, what I believe we need is to reclaim and to counter it with the gospel of true abundance, which is the spiritual heritage of our faith. Our religious ancestors were heretics. They were questioners, and one of the things they questioned was the idea that a loving God would damn some of his creatures to eternal damnation. Salvation for all is abundance. Now, true abundance is actually found all across our nation. Authors James and Deborah Fallows traveled almost 100,000 miles across U.S. airspace to see how smaller and more out-of-the-way communities are dealing with diversity, and what they found in general was that many of them are doing well. It's a book about this thick. I will not list all the cities, but you might want to get it when you're feeling down. You might want to just read a chapter, right? They found that actually in places where leadership was welcoming inclusion and change, those communities were more likely to be doing better economically. There were other factors, but one of them was that they were opposing the national rhetoric against people of color and immigrants. In Greenville, South Carolina, the mayor asked visitors to notice while the Fallows were there. Notice, he said, how many languages are being spoken. It was pride. He was proud of that. And so the Fallows concluded, America's contradictory evolution continues. Now, since the 2016 election, I cannot tell you the number of people, our people, who have asked me to stop talking about what they call identity politics because they say it is clear that is what's driving us apart. Now, I want to tell you, I don't think this is going to be a big surprise. I'm probably not going to stop talking about this. But what I really want to say is how much I cringe when I hear terms like identity politics or political correctness, because those are some of the twisted measuring sticks that have been used to create this illusion of false scarcity. When people talk about this, or when they say we need to not talk about political or social issues, what I want to say is I believe these political or social issues are the true moral issues of our times. It is not an indulgence to allow someone to claim their true identity or to allow them to use all of their gifts and knowledge in the context of our communities. An increasingly jaded media is spreading insidious groupthink, which is focused around protecting our individual ability to have our own lives in little protective bubbles all the time. New Yorker writer Jelani Cobb calls this the a la carte approach to reality, where if you want to view the world in a particular way, he says you can find the information that justifies you having that point of view. More and more, our technology is focused on separating us from the world and each other rather than connecting. We are barraged by groupthink and by a toxic consumerism, which says that the most important thing is for us to have everything we need every single moment. As a result, we sit by while the gap between the haves and have-nots in our society widens, and we sit by as conversations about those who are treated as a true American and those who are not continue among us. In her book, This Land is Their Land, author Barbara Ehrenreich looks at the ways we are caught in struggles around this question of who is an American. She looks at the hatred that is directed towards immigrants, to poor people, to our transgender kin. She looks at the ways that poverty has been the water that is gradually getting hotter, but the frogs are all looking at all these distracting other issues around us. She discusses how the tech industry treats the workers who people their cafeterias and clean their offices, how healthcare has become more about the bottom line and less about healthcare. All of these trends point to something terrifying in the groupthink. Groupthink has become as American as apple pie and prisoner abuse, she writes. Our standardized test-driven schools reward the right answer, not the unsettling question. So this is what I would say to you, my people. We need to be asking those unsettling questions. Because if you worship at the shrine of false scarcity, your gods are the larger-than-life personalities. The false scarcity narrative is the smokescreen that can, poof, make all the real inequities disappear. The truth is not that we don't have enough resources of time or attention or money to go around. The truth is that we have, once again, as we did in the era of the robber barons, allowed these resources to be concentrated at the top in the hands of a very, very few, while so many are truly hungry, asking, where is that hunger that Kevin mentioned? I do not deny the loss of power that they feel, or the loss of control that they feel at not being comfortable everywhere that they were, the ways that they used to be, the unease they feel at the loss of meaningful work. The fact is that the rebound from the economic downturn in 2008 has left many dispossessed in its wake. But that dispossession is at the hands of the uber wealthy, not at the hands of the marginalized people at the edges of our society. The false gospel of false scarcity says that it is people of color and queer folks and liberated women who are actually taking opportunity away from other people. And we know that isn't true. I do not want to say that this is just a question of economics. It is also a question of minds and hearts and spirits, and that is why it is the work of faith. There are people who are truly frightened by the idea because of the false news they have been taking in. They are frightened by the idea that someone with a different gender identity might be in their bathroom, or somebody with a different racial identity might be in their elevator. Fears are grounded in a view of scarcity and a lack of experience, because knowing people different from you keeps you from fearing them. And the overemphasis in the false news about change and difference really shows a tragic lack of faith in the human ability to grow and change and transform and learn. It is, you will not be surprised that I believe as a minister, a matter of faith. We need to remember that we value every person, that all people are sacred, and that we are connected together at a very deep level. You know, cruelty has many faces. One face is to mock that which is life-giving for another. This is a form of spiritual dispossession. And of the many, many damaging things that have happened in these last couple years in which we are living, there has been a dispossession by turning away from the validity of holding more diverse truths, which are seen as dangerous or seen as unwanted. We do understand now that there can be more than one thing that is true, multiple truths. But this has been perverted by the gospel of false scarcity into a disregard of all truth. New Yorker writer Jelani Cobb talks about the parallels between what we are seeing today and the political leadership in the time of McCarthyism. He says there's a difference between honoring opposite points of view and actually presenting things that are intentionally to be distorting. He notes that one of McCarthy's talents was that he could lie exponentially while people could only fact-check arithmetically. And we might know a few other people that might use that technique today. Just saying. If we buy into this rhetoric, we buy the whole rhetoric of the culture of false scarcity. And we cannot do that. The poet Marcus Wicker writes, "There are 10,000 selves in an epidermis. A culture of true abundance allows us to move beyond stereotypes, which are their own form of false scarcity." In his poem, "To a White Friend Who Wonders Why I Don't Spend More Time Pontificating the N-Word," a great title, Wicker remembers parents of a mutual friend who, quote, "asked if I knew gangbangers, if I had cousins in prison, bullet-riddled kin." In another poem, Wicker says, "I think X marks a continent of loss. I think the more you multiply, the more you have. I think so much depends on personal pronouns." Our faithful response is to amplify true abundance and to connect it to our vision of the future. In pockets across this nation, people are reaching out to learn and create with their neighbors. If I decorate with silver dollars and you use Louis Vuitton, why is that a problem? If you see a man in the moon and I see a rabbit pounding some rice, why are we worse off? It just gives us something to debate there out under the stars. If you call God holy and I call the common good God, why are we a threat to one another? Why is amplifying the beauty in your life a threat to the beauty in mine? If we hear the Quran quoted in the service in which we honor Rosh Hashanah, why is that bad? We need to put aside the gospel of false scarcity and remember that faith is a beautiful, diverse forest. May we offer a gospel of abundance to the world. May we replace groupthink with shared experience. May we trust ourselves to have enough heart and brain to embrace complexity with kindness, not cruelty. May we cherish each individual and the ways we are bound in mutuality. We have work to do, but may we never give up living our values, because this is how we will build a new way.